God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. This is 508, a show about Worcester for October the 27th, 2015. Today on the show, Brendan Melican.
How's it going?
It's going good.
Get over here. Mike Benedetti.
Michael Benedetti. Brendan, this is our pre-election special.
It's finally here.
I wish
months and months leading up to this event.
You know, for some reason, for the last decade or so, I've been disproportionately interested in Worcester politics.
Mm-hmm.
It's just been a real interest of mine, and I feel like I'm finally burned out.
Well, I think that's actually kind of natural too. I think even if you went through people who work on the worked in politics and whatnot, the same thing. By the time the election gets here, you're done. It's over.
You think this is going to be one of these things like pregnancy, that a couple of months after the election, I'm going to be like, I'd be willing to go through another election.
Yeah,
sure,
because
I'll forget the pain.
Because just like pregnancy, it's such a stressful and traumatic event that your brain actually blocks out everything that you went through. And a couple months from now, we're going to be looking back and, oh, that was awesome. You're only going to remember the beautiful things.
That was the best. Well, one thing that was great about this election year is that usually Worcester elections, people talk a lot about issues, but issues aren't important.
Mm-hmm.
This is one year when I think issues are going to be important.
Whether or not the issues themselves are important is a completely different topic.
The idea of issues being it's more about issues than,
Yes.
than about personality.
Definitely an issue-driven campaign cycle, which is great.
Yeah. So today on the show for our pre-election special, we're going to talk about, do Worcester elections matter, and does your vote matter? These are the two questions.
All right.
Do Worcester elections matter?
Oh, you're asking me?
What do you
I came here so you could tell me. Yeah, no, of course they matter. Any election matters. If for no other reason than to remind people of the process that they're able to participate in. If they didn't matter, then we may as well just have a lottery that just picks a random semi-qualified person out of a hat for 2 years, right? I mean, the idea of engagement is huge, and I think we all learned something, especially in these years where you can watch the number of active and engaged voters diminish over time.
Yes.
That's just as important, because it helps folks realize, one, that your voting base is dying, literally dying, and that there's work that needs to be done to bring new people into the fold. You mentioned this was a cycle that was driven by issues. I can guarantee you there are going to be first-time voters in this cycle who were drawn in by some of those issues. Not in droves. I mean, it's not going to be a game changer. We're not going to wake up on next Wednesday morning and find that there was, 100% voter turnout. But there will be new participants in that cycle, and they're brought in because of those issues and people finding new ways to tap into the interests of folks that are out there just wanting to be engaged. So the process itself matters, and in that sense, the elections matter.
I want to use this whiteboard.
Aww.
You just knocked it over, but I want to use this whiteboard to show some stuff. So here's what I'm going to say.
All right.
I think that the election matters as a whole. I think that the different votes that you have, some of them matter more than others.
Mm-hmm.
You've got three kinds of people that you get to vote for. Really four, I guess, in this election, right? You get to vote for at-large city councilors.
Right.
Everybody gets 6 votes. Those 6 candidates who get the most votes of all that pool of votes are at large.
Right.
At large. People watching this probably already know this, but I just want to go over it. And then most people are also going to have a district councilor to vote for. In some of the districts, there's nobody opposing the incumbent. In a couple of the districts,
but there'll still be a name there.
You could still vote. You could, as a protest, vote against them. And I honestly, I think that typically it's not surprising to see a third of the people vote nobody.
Right.
Just as a protest vote against the incumbent. I've said in the past on this show that the best way to think about a city councilor is as a LARPing ombudsman. LARPing is in live action role playing, that there's a lot of time spent saying, it's very important that we have some sort of long debate about whether or not to, repaint this line on the street or not, or name this holiday after somebody's dog, or whatever it is.
The real question to you is, are they or are they not in costume?
Exactly. They may as well have foam swords in a field casting pretend spells.
Yeah.
But the ombudsman part is very important, which is the part where, if you have to do something with street tax, or a street betterment assessment, taxes for repairing your street, and you're like, this isn't fair because of this and this, they're the person who's going to help you with that process.
Right.
Or if there's a problem with your sidewalk, or if you're having whatever kind of problem with your neighborhood, they're the people that you can turn to, and things will hopefully actually get fixed. There's nobody else really in city government who will like bird dog stuff for you, like your city councilor. So in that respect, it's really important. And the city council theoretically, I guess, could be a very influential body, but for all the time I've ever paid attention to Worcester politics, they really have not, right? The leadership comes from the city manager, the vision comes from the city manager, the day-to-day decision-making, of course, comes from the city manager, and the council doesn't seem to be that interested in pushing back on the city manager or directing the city manager.
Yeah, and I think the relationship has always been set up where you have more of a push and pull between the state delegation on Beacon Hill, the local delegation to Beacon Hill, and the manager's administration. Then you do have direct involvement from councilors, especially the district councilors
That's right.
as well. Yeah,
Sure. So then the second thing is the school committee members. The school committee, the relationship between the school committee and the superintendent is kind of like the relationship between the city councilors and the city manager, except that the school committee, in the decade that I've paid attention to Worcester politics, seems to be much more functional, and they're much more about setting an agenda, and they're much more about pushing the superintendent around, or at least letting the superintendent know, this is something we're not happy with, and this is something we are. So I feel like that's something where not only are they people who could help you with some school issue and be an ombudsman for you, but their opinion about the issues matters because they have a healthier relationship with their executive.
Exactly, and I think that makes perfect sense, right? Because their focus is very linear, right? I mean, like if we were asking at-large candidates this year what they thought their role in the schools should be, everybody had a different thought as to how deep into the schools they could actually get. If we were interviewing school committee candidates, I don't think if we asked them, so what should your role be in the collective bargaining agreement with the Worcester Fire Department, I don't think any of them would have said, the school committee really needs to have more of a say in the sort of resources that are allocated to the fire department. They have a very, very clearly defined lane to work in. So I think what you just described, that working relationship, is the byproduct of knowing exactly what it is that they're charged with doing, providing a quality public education, and they know exactly who that bidirectional relationship is in terms of the administration being the superintendent.
Yeah.
City council is a little bit more complicated, right? I mean, you think of the number of departments and department heads that need to be interacted with.
There's just a lot more options. Running a good school system, we know what that means. Running a good city could mean spending a lot of time on police matters, spending a lot of time on naming holidays after people's dogs, some mixture of the two.
You didn't even bring up zip lines, right? I mean, you could go in just about any direction.
This is not, nobody's talking about this. This is not going to happen this year. There's going to be no civic zip lines. The third thing then, of course, is the mayor. And the mayor, I think, obviously matters, in part because the mayor is on the school committee, and in part because the mayor is the chairman of the city council, so presumably the most powerful person on the city council.
Right.
In the mayor's race, this year it's been a very hard-fought race between the incumbent Mayor Joe Petty and the challenger Mike Gaffney. Bill Coleman is also running, but I don't think is seen as being a viable candidate for that, as much as I love Bill Coleman.
Yeah.
And nobody, except for maybe Bill's own relatives.
Love Bill Coleman as much
Love
as you
Bill
do.
Coleman as much as me. But, and I think it's sort of interesting. I would say, especially to those people who are worried that Gaffney is going to win, I sort of feel like, honestly, it's kind of like a win-win mayoral race for those guys, where it's like, if Gaffney loses, Gaffney loses. All right, great, your big enemy, Mike Gaffney's lost. But if Gaffney wins, maybe Mike Gaffney will be as inconsequential as every other Worcester mayor for the last 40 years.
There is that possibility.
But maybe Mike Gaffney won't be, and he'll figure out a way to be an effective Worcester mayor.
He could be that. Or he could also be, there's always that third option too, which I think is something that escapes folks when it comes to elections, is that sometimes voting against your own best interests gives you the opportunity to actually see whether or not the person that you're so terrified of is actually capable of burning the whole world down around you. And Mike Gaffney is probably not going to set the city on fire in terms of scorch and burn destructive politics.
There's
right?
nobody. There's nobody in this race who I know is prepared to destroy the city of Worcester. From
we have no one. Mike Gaffney's not building some secret Voltron in his garage, although he does have a lot of cars. So if there was anyone with that potential, it would be Mike Gaffney.
He would have. That's more. Maybe that's a little more of a Transformers.
That would be more of a Well, I don't know. Would it be? Were there any Transformers?
We don't need to get onto that. That's too controversial. But as I was saying, I think that if Mike Gaffney wins and is an effective mayor, then suddenly somebody's cracked the code, and then you can elect whoever you want to beat Mike Gaffney in the next election, and they can be an effective mayor for your issues.
They've got the roadmap to work with.
So I feel like I'm really hoping that either Joe Bryan figures it out, or not Joe Bryan, what's his name, Joe Petty?
That guy, yep. The real question is, going back to the real question, is do elections matter?
I think the answer is yes.
Okay.
I think the answer is yes. I think that the answer is they matter less than people say. I also wanted to mention this great quote from Connie Lukes, who was Worcester mayor for 3 or 4 years. There was a great interview with her with the Worcester Oral History Project after she left being the mayor, And the student who was doing the interview said, did you like being the mayor? And Connie's response was, it was an overwhelming task for a ceremonial position. So,
For a ceremonial. All right.
yeah, so, God bless these people who run for these ceremonial positions. They are overwhelming tasks.
And they are overwhelmed.
Yeah, so I guess the elections matter.
So we can go home now?
Yeah, do you want to wrap up the show? Anything else to talk about? We can talk about whether your vote, what is the value of your vote?
What is the value of my vote?
Here's what I want
I
to
see
say.
math down there.
I'm going to do some mathematics.
Let me hold this up for you so you can do some
We'll
math.
knock this sucker down again. Here's what I'm going to say, Brendan. I have been very skeptical in many elections that voting matters. This is an election, I think, where because issues matter and because candidates are coming from more different positions than in the past, that it probably is actually a consequential election. But I have on this show in the past advocated not voting in certain elections. Controversially, people have attacked me publicly and very much privately for this. I feel like this is, I read this great chapter in a book though that kind of made me think differently about this. And I want to just share this with you, my personal conversion experience. This is in a book called Doing Good Better by Will McCaskill. This is a book about the effective altruism movement. And effective altruism is something we can talk about during our Voltron show next week.
All right.
But he has a chapter in the book called Why Voting is Like Donating Thousands of Dollars to Charity. And he tries to calculate the expected value of voting. And expected value is a pretty straightforward thing. Like it's basically you look at the possible outcomes and then you say what are the outcomes worth and what is the chance the outcomes are going to happen, and then you multiply those things together.
All right.
So like if you've got a 10% chance of winning $100, right? It's like, well, your chance, each time you take a chance, your chance is 100 divided by times 10%. 100 divided by 10, it's $10.
Sure.
So if you got a 10% chance of winning $100, you would expect to win $10 if you did that often enough.
Okay.
So the idea is, what is that for voting? What if you voted often enough? What would you expect the benefit to be? Now the thing is, when you're voting, you're obviously not personally getting any money, but you are electing people who are making decisions with money, and if you are voting for people that you like and people you think will help society, it's kind of like saying, I would like to see this much more money go to the causes that I think will make the world a better place and help people who need help.
Yeah,
or whatever.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, no one's cutting you a check from City Hall for your participation on Election Day, but I mean, I think it is fair to say that there's an obvious return on investment in terms of voting, which is why elections matter, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the outcomes in the city, whether it be people's property values from their investments, opportunities for starting businesses, public school education for young folks, these are things that are all directly tied to the outcomes of elections. Public safety. All of these things directly tied. So there is a definite, concrete return on investment that you can wrap your hands around. That's probably worth more than $10.
So here's
That's not a bad investment for that $10.
So here's his calculation, and this is a back of the envelope calculation. This involves a lot of guesswork. When you're making these kind of calculations, the goal is to make the guesswork, reasonable enough that maybe somebody can argue with you, but that you're not going to be too far out of line.
You're holding a marker. My arm's getting tired. Am I doing anything up here? Here, you can hold it. I know I don't want to do anything. I know you're going to draw some pictures.
So he tries to calculate the expected value of voting, and he looks at the 2008 presidential race, and there was a paper published by Nate Silver and a few others calculating that you had a 1 in 60 million chance of casting a tie-breaking vote in the 2008 presidential election. That's actually a lot higher than I would have guessed, 1 in 60 million. And he thinks it's reasonable to assume that if your preferred candidate won that election, it was like $314 billion being spent in a way that you think benefits society better. So the value of your vote in the 2008 presidential election would have been $314 billion, a 1 in 60 million chance of that. 314 billion divided by 60 million is $5,200. And that's like a give or take thing. So maybe it's guessing way in the wrong direction and it should be 50,000, or maybe it's guessing in the other direction and it should be 500. It's somewhere in there though. It's probably at least worth hundreds of dollars.
I think the more important question then is, on Tuesday, is my time better spent going to vote or going to Cumberland Farms to buy a lottery ticket?
The lottery tickets have way worse odds.
The odds are
There's
worse.
no way. The expected value of a lottery ticket is always a lot less than you spend.
Okay, right. I just want to make sure.
In fact, it's usually, I mean, there's an argument to be made that your chances of finding a winning lottery ticket laying on the ground that somebody scratched off and threw away are about your chances of, if you buy a lottery ticket, that lottery ticket winning. That's how bad your chances are in any kind of real big lottery.
Oh, good. So voting is still the...
So voting is way better than lotteries. You don't get the money
better
yourself.
return on
But
investment.
like he says, it's like giving thousands of dollars to charity. So
Sure.
Worcester, you got, how many votes are you going to get on this? You basically got like 14 votes, right? That you're going to get to have on the ballot. So you've got six at-large councilors, 6 at-large school committee people, 1 district councilor, and then the mayor vote is kind of like a little bonus thing. So, do you think there's a 1 in 60 million chance that you would cast a tie-breaking vote in a Worcester election? I think it's got to be a lot better than 1 in 60
I
million.
hope not. I wouldn't sleep if there was ever an election in Worcester that was decided by 1 vote. I would never sleep again thinking that it was my vote.
It happens all the time. We've had so many close elections.
They're
in
close,
years.
but not that kind of.
Well, we've never had a presidential election that literally hinged on 1 vote.
This is true. Yeah.
So the idea is, if that happened, what's the chance you would be the tiebreaker in that 1 in 60 million? That's still a lot more likely than I would have thought.
Yeah.
Nate Silver, I trust his math on this stuff. I think the answer is, honestly, it's got to be 100 times more likely than would be a tiebreaker in Worcester than you would be at large in the United States.
But I think that also, and that's partly why I drew the tic-tac-toe board up here, because I think part of that also is based on the idea that all things are considered equal in an election, which they're not, right? I mean, even though we have nonpartisan elections, if you started breaking down or adjusting for a candidate's viability based on party affiliation, based on the issues that they brought up, like this year, you start getting a lot of artifacts that are there that are going to throw off that idea of a tie. That's ultimately would make, if Joe Petty cloned himself, or Mike Gaffney cloned himself, and they ran against each other for mayor, then you might be able to come close to the idea of having that one vote tie-breaking sort of thing.
And there's no, right, and this is not to say that we worked out every mathematical angle here. This is just to say that, this is where we're at.
Yes.
This is just a guesswork. So I'm going to say, I think it's literally 100 times more likely that you break a tie in a Worcester election. There's only going to be like, how many thousand, a few thousand people vote, maybe 10,000,
Oh yeah,
20,000
yeah. And when you have that low a number of turnout, the likelihood of having
all you
that
do
close.
is, it doesn't have to be the Gaffney-O'Brien or Gaffney-Petty race. It could be, why do I was confused? Joe O'Brien. It could be anything. It could be anything. Anyway, so let's say it's 100 times more likely. That's 1 in 600,000 chance of being the tiebreaker. The annual budget on the school side is $300 million a year, give or take. This is all give or take. City side, $300 million a year. Any candidate you elect then is presumably controlling a $300 million budget. They're controlling it for 2 years, 2-year term, $600 million over two years. Now, I always like to bring up the fact that a lot of what we spend the money on is not up to the city council or the school committee. It's stuff that other legal entities or other contracts are forcing us to spend. What is the discretionary budget? Nobody I've talked to knows. I'm going to say it's 10%. This sounds, is it 50%? Is it 5%? I don't know. 10% is somewhere in the ballpark. All I'm going for the ballpark. So I think 10%. So, what do we say? $600 million. 10% of $600 million of a budget is $60 million. Honestly, we're thinking about one candidate here. Maybe they control a tenth of that, because you're going to vote for an effective candidate. You're not voting for a nudnik in this idea. You're voting for somebody who really can control 1% of that money. $6 million over 2 years.
Okay.
So $6 million, and you've got a 1 in 600,000 chance of being the tiebreaker on how $6 million gets spent. Right? What does that equal? That equals $10.
That is a 10. Yeah. That's what you're saying.
That's not a dollar. That's a.
Yeah, you get
10. So I think it's $10. So like, now is it? Am I making a guess here that it's some estimation wrong here?
Oh yeah, it might be $11.
It might be $11. It might be $1. It might be $100.
Could be $100.
But I think it's probably in the ballpark. I would be surprised if it's. I think it's probably in the ballpark of $10. I'd be surprised if it was 10 cents. I'd be surprised if it was $1,000. So I think the expected value to the community of your voting is going to be like $10.
What would you get for $10 in the city of Worcester?
Depends on where you go. There's a number of restaurants where you could get something really nice. A coffee shop for $10, you could honestly get a cup of coffee and a little snack.
Yeah.
Some place like maybe a little Middle Eastern joint, you could get a nice falafel sandwich and a soda for $10.
How about in terms of municipal? Like, would $10 get you a bottle filled?
No way. I mean, $10 is probably a fraction of an hour for most city employees of them doing work, or it's a small amount of materials or whatever.
Okay.
But it's $10. I mean, it's $10.
Yeah.
It's not $5,000, but it's $10.
Right.
So the idea is to think that you going to vote, you can, if you want to be cynical about it, or not cynical about it, if you want to be, if you don't want to worry about the civic angle, civic values, civic participation, you can say it's like giving $10 to charity.
Okay.
You give $10 to a charity. What is it? What does the Red Cross do with $10? It pays for a fraction of an hour of somebody's time. It buys a few bandages. It pays for some number of nails for building a house in a disaster area. But you would still give $10 to the Red Cross or whatever charity you like, MSF or
which is a good way of looking at it. Although, if you do look at it that way and you try writing off your $10 donation to the city of Worcester via voting on your taxes next year, we're not supporting you in that, and don't blame us for it.
If you do it, let me know. I'm really curious to hear how that works out. Anyway, I just think that this is cool. Like before, again, I used to feel like it's not worth voting in an election unless you really feel like there's some real issues at stake. Now I feel like it's actually worth voting in a city election. I mean, like my polling place is not that far from where I am usually during the day.
Sure.
It's a nice walk over there. Voting is very fast. There's no lines in Worcester elections because nobody votes. Yeah, and I get to just like talk to some nice people there at the polls. There'll probably be some people holding signs outside. I get to chat with them. Yeah. It's a pleasant way to spend half an hour of my day, and I get to think that I'm giving $10 to charity. I say I'm going to vote, Brendan. That's what I'm just putting that out there. I'm going to vote.
You going to tell us who you're going to vote for?
I don't know.
Okay.
Well, in the past we always endorsed candidates on these shows, right?
Yeah. And we did in the primary too. Or we at least gave like a pitch for it.
Yeah. I mean, this is just part of my. I'm going to use the whiteboard. This is just part of my feeling like, I'm so tired of this election.
It is kind of exhausting.
I kind of don't even want to endorse anybody.
No, I mean, I think if we could say anything, it would just be I would say give newcomers a strong, healthy look. That's I think that's kind of been the MO for us over the last couple of years.
You should be biased in favor of challengers and against lawyers.
Against lawyers, yeah.
Yeah.
Don't trust. Yeah. The people that you don't trust in life, generally speaking, you shouldn't actually put in charge of your life.
I have one more math thing I can share with people.
Oh, good.
This is how should you vote. I can't tell. I don't want to endorse somebody necessarily, but I can tell you strategically. Now, the last time we did a show, I was talking about why you should not bullet vote. Bullet voting means even though you could cast six votes on the ballot. You don't cast all 6. You're like, I love Mike Parado so much. It's going to be 1 vote for Mike Parado. All my other 5 votes are going to be blank because screw all the other candidates. I want to help Parado and not even slightly help anybody else. And I argue that this was never a good strategy in our election system.
Just pausing for a moment. If you do that, does your vote, is it worth more or less?
I don't. We can talk about that next 2 years. Next week we'll talk about that.
Between Voltron
between Mike Voltron and Mike Parado, all the other stuff. And the reality is that you can sit down and draw on a piece of paper election scenarios involving 2 candidates, 3 voters. Oh look, in this case it's worth somebody bullet voting. You can definitely I would say that there definitely are situations where bullet voting makes sense.
Sure.
Here, what I would argue is that once you get above a little 2 candidate, 3 voter model, it becomes insanely complicated. Like nobody even can figure out how to work it out. Complicated to figure out whether you should bullet vote or not. So I would say you shouldn't bullet vote because it's hard to figure out when you should bullet vote. I would say it's impossible to figure out if it's like 50-50. Should you bullet vote or not? It's impossible for you to know. Yeah. And it's impossible to know what the right strategy is.
Of course.
But
the flip side of that is also that just because you have 6 votes doesn't mean you have to use them all. And if you find yourself having voted for 5 people, you got 1 hanging out, and you look at the remainder on that list, and you can't find anybody who you even remotely appreciate in life.
You don't have to agree with.
You don't have to use 6 votes.
But I want to argue that you should, and this is because there's 2 reasons. The first reason is that or there's two sort of factors playing into this. The first one is that I can give you an actual strategy for if you don't bullet vote, that we know mathematically could be a good strategy. And the second thing is because we had a preliminary election, because we've already voted for all these candidates, you know, whatever, 2 months ago.
Sure.
We actually kind of know something really interesting, which is how strong they all are. Like objectively, we know how the electorate actually thinks how strong they are.
Yes and no. I would argue that
Wow.
well, because there are folks that you can actually look at, again, with math, you can look at and figure out what their ceiling is based on their ability, their name recognition prior to an election cycle, their potential for touching new voters, and then what kind of growth they could see going into a general election. So like every candidate is going to have, you know, a hypothetical ceiling in terms of the number of votes they could capture.
Right.
The preliminary only shows you the potential ceiling up to that point. It doesn't actually figure in any of the work that candidates with a higher ceiling could do between the preliminary and the general election. Like I would argue that there were some folks in that preliminary that they actually maxed out the number of votes that they could potentially receive in that preliminary because either they were already incumbents or they were challengers who had actually made contact with everyone that could potentially vote for them, that they could really sell themselves on in that time frame. Then there are other folks that didn't have that same opportunity. They had work to do between the preliminary and the general. They're actually capable of raising that ceiling for themselves.
This is true. This is also makes it really complicated. So
I
wanna
know,
go
that's
into,
why I'm telling you, don't vote for people you don't trust.
I want to go
You know
into a
what's gonna happen.
complicated but more simple way to do strategy here. And this is what we talked about before, the Meyerson-Weber strategy, or the Meyer-Weber-Son strategy for voting. The Meyer-Weberson strategy says that if you want to maximize your expected value, that what we're looking at there for $10,
Yeah.
if you want to maximize how happy you are with the election results, sometimes you need to vote for people who are maybe not your most favorite candidate, because that person actually has a much better chance than your favorite candidate. You kind of like them, and so multiplying that together, the expected value is a lot higher.
Right.
And they sort of go through the math of how do you compare, how do you decide, how do you calculate what somebody's chance is based on what you know about the election.
Sure.
Usually you don't know that much. The factors like you bring up are very important. In this case, you at least know, based on the preliminary, for example, generally how popular people are.
Right.
So here's what I think the strategy is if you don't bullet vote. I think that, you know, if there's people on that list that you got to vote for because, whatever, they're your sister, you're in love with them, they're Bill Coleman, whatever. People you got to vote for whether or not they're going to be that successful in the election. That's fine. Vote for those people. You know, you vote for those one or two people. But then what I think you do for these last four slots is you look at that preliminary election results and you say, you just start at the top and you're just like, who is acceptable to me? Who do I like more than dislike?
Oh yeah.
Do I kind of like Joe Petty? Then put him as your next slot. Do I kind of like Connie Lukes? Or do I kind of like put her as your next slot? Do I kind of like Mo Bergman? You know what they say, Mo Bergman, Mo problems. Put him as your next slot. Do I kind of like Mike Gaffney?
I was going to say,
Put
can you
him
please
as your
mention
next
Mike
slot.
Gaffney before we get a letter saying that we're picking favorites here?
Here's the big G
There it is.
star for Mike Gaffney. And that's how I think you should do it, because that way you're maximizing your expected satisfaction with the election.
Yes.
And it's at least a strategy that has some rational basis behind it.
Yes.
If you want to vote based on emotion, that's fine. I'm not going to judge you however you want to do it, man. If you want to,
We won't publicly judge.
you're not going to avoid me judging inside my heart, but what can I do? Well, Brendan.
Hey man, it's been a great season.
Yeah.
I'm done.
All right, guys.
Good seeing you. See you in a couple of
Bye-bye.
years.